Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. I'm Anne-Marie Green.
I'm Vladimir Dutib. The international community is urging restraint as tensions escalate between the U.S. and Iran. Washington has blamed Tehran for attacking 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman yesterday. However, the Trump administration didn't offer any clear evidence. Officials cited intelligence reports and weapons used in the suspected attacks.
The U.S. military also released this video appearing to show Iran's Revolutionary Guard removing an unexploded mine from one of the tankers. President Trump phoned into Fox News earlier to build up the case against Iran. He called it a nation of terror.
Well, Iran did do it, and you know they did it because you saw the boat. I guess one of the mines didn't explode, and it's probably got essentially Iran written all over it. And you saw the boat at night trying to take the mine off and successfully took the mine off the boat.
Yep.
And that was exposed, and that was their boat, that was them. And they didn't want the evidence left behind. I guess they don't know that we have things that we can detect in the dark that work very well. So we have that, and I know you put it on. So, no, it was them that did it.
David Martin has the latest from the Pentagon.
This assessment is based on intelligence, the weapons used, the level of expertise needed to execute the operation.
One reason Secretary of State Pompeo laid the blame squarely on Iran is this video. The U.S. says it shows an Iranian patrol boat coming alongside and removing an unexploded mine from one of the tanker's hulls, making off with the evidence, in other words. The U.S. says other mines planted by Iran did explode, leaving one tanker so badly damaged it was in danger of sinking and the other in danger of drifting into Iranian waters. CBS News consultant retired Admiral Sandy Winnefeld explained how an attack like this could be pulled off.
This was actually a fairly high-skilled attack, probably conducted by a small boat coming alongside the ship, attaching a limpet mine or 2 or 3 to the ship, and then making its escape in time to avoid the explosion.
But the owner of one of the tankers says before the attack, the crew saw flying objects, suggesting mines were not the cause. Regardless of how the attack occurred, the bottom line is the same.
At the end of the day, this will create more instability in the Gulf region. It's not going to help things at all. And when there's less instability in the Gulf region, for Americans, that means potentially higher prices at the gas pump and potential for conflict should this escalate.
Secretary Pompeo said the U.S. response to the attacks would focus on diplomatic and economic measures.
Iran should meet diplomacy with diplomacy, not with terror, bloodshed, and extortion.
For more on this, let's bring in CBS News State Department reporter Christina Ruffini. She's joining us from Washington. Christina, if Iran is responsible for these attacks, what's the reasoning behind them? What do they hope to gain?
It's unclear on both fronts. There's no doubt the U.S. has put enormous pressure on Iran through round after round of sanctions. But the thing that seems to have really provoked the ire of Tehran was the stopping of the oil waivers. The U.S. is no longer allowing countries like Japan, India, Turkey, and others to import Iranian oil without being subject to secondary sanctions. The U.S. has also made it increasingly difficult for countries still in the Iran nuclear agreement to do any kind of trade with Iran. So the Iranian economy is really suffering, which means people get angry, which means people tend to blame the guys in charge. And the guys in charge, therefore, need to show something to their domestic audience to say they're fighting back. And although Iran has not taken claim publicly for these attacks or the attacks on the other tankers or the Saudi pipeline bombing, many experts I've spoken to say these events seem to have been pretty carefully calculated to cause harm, but not really be big enough to justify a large military attack or draw the U.S. and Iran into an actual conflict.
Okay, so here's the thing. Then what's being done to avoid a conflict? What's being done diplomatically to solve this or to at least sort of bring the temperature down?
The U.S. has said, and we heard Secretary Pompeo said yesterday that it's continuing to use economic and diplomatic pressure to try to bring Iran back to the table. Emphasis, I think, on the former. There doesn't seem to be too much diplomacy going on. Iran rejected Japanese President Shinzo Abe's efforts to foster talks, and President Trump further undercut those efforts yesterday by tweeting that while he appreciated the efforts of the Japanese president, the Iranians weren't ready to talk, and neither was the U.S. The State Department, however, said just last week the Iranians know how to get in touch if they want to negotiate.
Christina, is military action on the table?
There doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite for that. Look, this is not a president who likes military conflict. He likes to get out of military conflicts, although his efforts to pull troops out of places like Afghanistan and Syria have been consistently stalled. I've not heard anyone in the administration talk about wanting war with Iran. They've said just the opposite. And I think the American people do not have an appetite to get involved in another conflict in the Middle East. They've seen what's happened over decades in Iraq and Afghanistan and the progressively diminishing returns in those theaters. Now, we could certainly see, if these kinds of attacks continue, some sort of targeted strike like the U.S. conducted in Syria. But despite the rhetoric, the drums of war aren't beating quite yet.
So just sort of give us some context. Why is this region so important, the Gulf of Oman and the Strait of Hormuz?
This strait is kind of critical to the global oil trade. It's been called the world's most important choke point for oil. It's a fairly narrow waterway by terms of these large waterways and these giant ships. It connects the Gulf of Oman with the Persian Gulf, and about a fifth of all the oil shipments in the world pass through that area. It's crowded. It's an area that tends to be conflict prone. So any disruption of that waterway or hint of possible future disruption has a huge impact on world oil prices. We saw them spike yesterday, just a little bit, around 2%. And markets will be watching very closely to see what happens in the coming weeks.
All right, Christina, thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys.